Hello again, I'm Adam McIntosh here for Music Over Miles to talk about our next tutorial. In Garageband, the drums are the most important thing. I spend the most time creating my drum sounds, the rhythms, the patterns, the changes, the fills. There's so much to it. And I'm really excited to show you this tutorial. Please pay close attention to what I'm going to tell you in it, because by the end of this tutorial, you're going to understand how to get the most out of the drum samples and the available drums that are already in Garageband, okay? This is really difficult to track, to multi-track, as I talked about earlier, original drums, right? Because you'd have to have numerous microphones, you'd have to do a lot more mixing. These drums are readily available to you, you just need to know how to make them sound more natural. And so that's what I'm going to show you in this tutorial, and I'm really excited to do it. I'm Adam McIntosh, I'm here for Music Over Miles, and let's dive in. Alright, here we are again. I've opened GarageBand, as I have shown you before, by clicking on this icon, and it's giving us an empty project, which is exactly what we want whenever we're starting a new project. A project is your song, right? So when we open this empty project, it's going to give us a blank slate. And it's of course going to drop down our options to choose a track type. And what I talked about in the intro is really the importance of the drums. Okay, the drums to me are the most important part. So when you're recording or creating tracks for drums, and we are recording, it's not going to ask you for inputs because the drums already exist inside of GarageBand. So the only thing you need here is for it to tell you, I hear sound from your interface, whatever that is. So we're going to create a drum track. And there's our friend Nikki. Okay, so in this tutorial, we're going to talk about creating drum tracks, which we just did, and how to craft them to make them sound as good as you can, because everyone has heard these drums, right? But you want your drums to sound as natural and real as possible. So there are some things that you can do to augment them and to change the size of them, which I'll show you, that will make it really, really cool when you play the tracks for other people. They won't sound like the typical tracks in GarageBand. Alright, so today we're going to use a very straight, what I refer to as 4 on the floor drum track by Logan here, which does, as they say, retro rock. For me, which just really means it's a 4/4 drum beat, and it's pretty straightforward. Okay, let's give a listen to this and hear what we've got. Alright, so pretty straightforward, right? Now whenever you're going to work on your drums and your drum, these are called stems, alright? Tracks are sometimes referred to as stems. When you're going to work on these stems, the easiest way to do it is to highlight this portion here, which is the cycle range, and drag it to the distance of the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bars of drums, right? And the reason why is because if you listen, okay, 4 bars, we go into the second half, and at the end, there's a little fill, and it starts over again. That loop, this looping that's happening here, is what gives you the ability to change the drums and hear them change in real time. Alright, so the first part that I want to talk about are these sounds down here. They've got Blue Ridge, Bluebird, Brooklyn, Detroit Garage. And so let's change the drums right now from they're on retro rock to Detroit Garage and listen to what happens. All right, so a much thinner sound. I'm hoping that you hear that. Let's try Liverpool. Wow. Major difference. Okay, so these are different drum sets, as you can see up here. When I change the drum set here to Detroit Garage, you get a different drum set here. So you can always know which drum set you're using by looking right here. And I like to use this one because the hand claps are the best. That's why I like to use it the most. But we're going to go back to this Liverpool one because you're going to be able to hear it a lot better today. All right, so what can we do to make this drum stem or this drum track sound a little bit more unique? The first panel that you want to look at is this mix panel down here. All right, the mix is what I talked about in the intro, where you would have all those mics on different parts of the drum set. So this would be the kick drum, this would be the snare, this would be the toms and miking the toms, this would be the microphone that would be on the hi-hats, this is the microphone that would be on the cymbals, and any kind of percussion that's added, like I said, hand claps or tambourines or anything like that that are in the drum beat. Okay, so I'm going to mess with these dials for a second and just give a listen to what they do. All right, way reduced kick. Let's leave that in about the middle and listen to what happens to the snare. All right, a lot louder. So, bring that back to the middle, and let's listen to the hi-hat when we change it. Alright, so the hi-hat comes through a lot better. Now, typically you don't want to leave these things cranked all the way up, because later on they will kind of be blown out in your speakers. And by blown out, I mean they'll sound a little distorted. So we always kind of want to back off on these, and I'm just doing this by using the mouse and dragging down or pulling up the dial, right? You can turn the hi-hat off with this button here. And you can do the same with any of the other instruments on the drum set, and by instruments I mean the kick, the snare, the toms. Alright, so we have a pretty good drum sound. I would like a little bit more snare, personally, so I'm going to pull that one up. And we have a pretty good snare sound now. Over here we've got something called compression. Let's talk about compression for a second. Alright, compression is just what it says it is. If you were to make a sandwich and it was really, really big and it had a lot of food on it and you couldn't fit it in your mouth, you would press down on the sandwich and be able to bite into it. And that's a lot like what compression is. It is the compression of the high sounds, the top sounds, or the high-end sounds that are coming out of any given track. So you'll see the top of these sounds here, and the bottom, so that they're more even, all right? The one thing to remember about compression is you don't want to use too much on all of the tracks that you're going to create later on, because you will hear, ultimately, a piece of music that sounds over-compressed. But let's add a little bit so that you can hear what it does. See, it's on. Alright, so that compression made the snare come out a little bit better, right? Because it was compressing the sound of the kick, which is really big on this drum track, and it was kind of smushing it down, and it allowed for other things to kind of poke their heads out. Alright, now in under effects, it's got the tone and the room. Okay, these are really important because the tone of the drum set can go from this side over here, which is really like a whole tone, or sort of a fatter tone, a thicker tone, to the other side, which is a much thinner tone. So give that a listen now. All right, so much brighter when we pull the tone up to the right side. Again, I don't like these things to be all the way up, because later we're gonna put some effects on them that are gonna brighten everything up, but not right now. All right, cool. So let's listen to the room sound when we change this. And basically what this is a virtual dial that allows us to change the room that the drum set is in, which is very cool. You hear that kick? Nice and punchy right there. And kind of flappy and thin, as if you're standing in the room listening to the kick drum. That's a lot like what it sounds like when you're right in front of it. So if you want that sound, that's cool. You'll still get it around this range, but I really like it about here. That sounds nice and clean to me. Okay, great. Now, what are the other things that we can do with this? So our drummer, Logan here, has the ability to change what's happening in this drum stem or this drum track considerably. Right now, we're on this here, which is the smart controls for the Liverpool drum set. And that's all the knobs and dials, so this is a knob and dial. But if we go here to this editor, just like a pair of scissors, and click on that, we get all of these settings down here. Okay, now this is where it starts to get really fun. So you can see over here we've got simple, complex, soft, and loud. And this is set right in the middle on a beat preset called AM Gold. All right, so let's listen to that when we change it. All right, so I won't go through all of them right now, but what you can see is that by changing these presets, this moves to more complex drum beats, and the cymbals were highlighting, or the toms were highlighting, or the hi-hat was highlighting, and this knob over here, fills, was changing considerably, right? So let's go back to AM Gold and just change this one drum beat. Now you can do this with all of the drum beats down here and customize them so that they sound exactly the way that you want them to. Okay, we got a lot more kick there, right? Maybe too much. Cool. Now the kick and snare pattern can change a lot. When you get all the way over to here, the drums will play in halftime. And if you go here, they'll play in double time. Our hi hi-hat has the same functions. We can use this one. Or this closed version. It gives you 1, 2, 3, 4, and it sounds like, yeah, on the fourth one it's opening up. So you hear the closed hi-hat and the open hi-hat. Cool. Then one of the funnest parts is adding a tambourine, maracas, or hand claps. Now it's very often that you can't hear these right away, so you have to do a couple of unique things to make them stand out. Alright, there's our hand claps. And we can simplify this, and simplify it even more, so the hand claps really stand out. If you don't like any of these sounds, you can change to a different beat preset and you'll get a whole set of different sounds. But what's really cool over here is you have this fills section. And the fills section is exactly that. It will give you more drum fills if you turn it up. And even more if you turn it up. You can see that right here we've got a whole bunch coming. Alright, so maybe that's a little much. Maybe we'll pull it back to about here and we watch those waveforms disappear and we'll listen to what it did this time. Okay, way cooler. The less fills, I feel like, the better, because it leaves more space for all the tracks and all of the music that you have to put on top of this. So even this, for me, is a bit much, but I'm just showing you what the capability of a single drum track can do. Alright, so let's take this off. And one of the great features about Garageband is that if you like what you have right here, you can duplicate it. And it will give you exactly the same, or roughly the same drum beat that you have. The fill at the end might be a little bit different because it gives you a little bit of variety, but sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it gives you the same exact drum beat and fills all the way through. Okay, so that's the first thing that I want to talk to you about in terms of making your drums sound a little bit more unique. So one of the really cool things to do, I'm going to pull this over so you can see it a little bit better, is to expand your track out so you can see exactly what's happening right here. So if we fast forward to this part, we get that. But we don't have to stick with that. We can pull this back halfway and pull this forward to here, and it will add something in the next drum track. And what that will do is give you a fill all the way through this bar. Okay, so that's one way to add variety to your drum beats so that they don't sound too typical or too much like all the rest of the drums in Garageband. And this one happens to be particularly cool. I dig it. Alright, so if you notice by dropping my cursor right here, I can start wherever I want in this drum track. And I just want to make a special note that if you have this on, it's always going to start at the beginning. No matter where you put the cursor, it will start at the beginning. So make sure you have that off when you go to edit longer drum stems or drum tracks. We're going to pull this back so that we can see our project a little bit better. And when I add the third stem or the third portion of the track, this stays the same. Now I can change this if I want to, It just depends on what I'm going to put down here. All right, so still we have pretty typical sounding drums for GarageBand. But there's something even cooler that you can do, and that's over here in this little loop browser. So the loop browser will open up a whole bunch of different instruments and drums. If you click on instrument, you can select which ones you want so you're not seeing all of them, right? Okay, so we want all drums. And we want to look here at this tempo section here, because this is going to tell us roughly what tempo, 120 beats per minute, these loops or samples are running at. Now, when we started our drum track, we left it at exactly 110 beats per minute. You can change this by double-clicking on it and making it 106. Will you be able to hear the difference? Pretty hard. But if I change it to 70, you can certainly hear the difference. All right. So we're going to bring that back up to 110. Make sure you hit enter. And it's in 4/4, the time signature. There are other time signatures here, but when you're starting out, try to stick with 4/4. It keeps things a little bit simpler. If you want to change time signatures later on, there is 3/4, 5/4, 6/8, 7/8, 12/8. But really, just start here. Okay. This is a 1, 2, 3, 4, which will count you in before the drum track starts. You want that. And this is the metronome. Now this will play, if you click on that, at the same time as the drum beat, as that little tick-tock. Okay. It gets kind of annoying if you leave that on for a long time, but if you don't use this and you don't use drums, again, it's not going to match up with anything that you record later, and certainly not going to match up with anything that you share with someone else and they're trying to record to it. Okay, so drums or the metronome, one or the other. You want to have this tempo and rhythm really straight so that everything you put on afterwards is at the same tempo and rhythm. Okay, so let's grab one of these loops and listen to it at the same time as our drums. Alright, so as you can see, there are a ton of these. I'll move this over so you can see how far down this scrolls. Alright, now let's find one that we sort of dig. I can't go through the whole list on here, it would take an hour, but there's a volume control. So if it's super loud, you can turn it down. And, okay, that one's not the greatest. Let's see what else they've got. Alright, so this is kind of interesting to me because this might be a really good way to start the song off so that it's got an interesting intro. Now with these tracks, they're really simple to use, these loops. You just drag them where it says drag Apple Loops here, and we're going to drag it to the beginning of the song. Let me put this back. And let's listen to what that sounds like if our track were to start off with just this loop at the top. All right. So if this part was a really interesting or kind of zany instrumental, it would sound really cool to have these drums happening behind or on top of these, and then make space for a vocal that's about to come in. So you can imagine and you suddenly have a lot more space. Okay. The other way to use these is to draw back your original drums completely and have a different drum set come in entirely. And I do that quite a bit as well. Now you can do that anywhere. You can take this double time drum beat and bring it, let's say, to over here. Match it up with this. Let's pull these back just halfway and pull this back just this far. And this is a really cool way to create a break in a song later on. Right? So you can change the length of that to whatever you'd like it to be. Doesn't always have to be even. You can use any of these markers along here. But say you have a great set of words and you want to drop them in right there. That's a super cool way to use these. And you can use really as many of them as you want. I don't ever use more than 4 or 5 of these. You can put different styles in the same track. So I could drag this double down topper to the same track. But if I do that, what I have to remember is anything that I do to this track, it's going to affect both of these. So it might be better practice for me to pull this one, let's take that one out, and pull this double down topper to its own track. All right. So if I have this here, let's say this happens at the end of this track. So we've got our little section here. The drums come back in. Alright, so these are great for bridges and songs. I can add my drums over here, take this back to there, and get the same effect. Super cool, right? Okay, so the next super fun thing you can do with this is, say I want these drums here to be the same as these drums over here, but I want to change these drums. If we click on this so that this is highlighted, and be sure that it's just one highlighted and not all of them, because you will change all of your drums if you do this. You want to make sure that you just have one highlighted. Okay, so for that section, I'm going to go to this double live drum set. I'm going to add a tambourine, and I'm going to turn it on 3. I've got the fills up here, and watch what it does. You can see the waveform is completely different from here to here. And we drop into the same drum beat we started with. So really the limit here is your imagination. There is no limit. You can have a second drum track of these natural drums. This is something that I think a lot of people don't consider when they're making drums for Garageband, but it will allow you to do this. The one thing you have to be aware of is if you do this, it can create a sound called out of phase. So if you have two of the exact same tracks, you say you did a track and you copied it and you put it underneath the other track, they're going to be out of phase. And that's why you really have to record things one at a time for it to sound natural. But you can get away with a lot by going up to track, new track with duplicate settings, and your plus button right here will give you the same track that you have here and the same track that you have here. Now we have a little conflict here, right? So let's listen to that. All right, that's a little messy, right? But what it does is it kind of beefs up your drums. So if you want them to be really heavy in some section, you can add a second track of drums as long as you're not getting that out of phase sound. Now I am hearing a little bit of out of phase sound. So what I might do is draw this back in volume a little bit. And yeah. So that makes it a little less noticeable. You'll be able to hear that when you're mixing with your headphones on, or when you're mixing with a speaker and working on your drums. Spend as much time as you possibly can on creating your drum tracks and getting them to sound exactly like you want them to. You can always edit these things in later. But these original tracks that you're going to lay down your song to, you want them to be at the right tempo. So is this the tempo of the music that you want to create? Or do you want something around 100 beats per minute? And you can change all these drums at the same time by doing that. Okay. Can you not play the part that you want to play as fast as those drums are going? Really important things to consider as you're creating drums for Garageband. Alright, so we created tracks, we created duplicate drums, we dropped in some of these Apple loops, of which there are tons. And I do like these blue samples a little bit better than these yellow ones just because the volume is a little bit higher on these and they're easier to deal with. But let's say, for example, that we took this Duncan Bridge one and put it in here. Alright, now that's a little bit long, a little bit longer than I'd like it to be. Let's pull it back to here and give it a listen from a volume perspective. Okay, so you hear how quiet that is? Even if I turn that up over here, it still doesn't really cut it. And it's not going to cut through when you have multiple instruments down here that you're recording. So I do like the blue waveforms here a little bit better. It's not to say you can't use these, you can, but if you're going to, you have to know that you will want to go back to your dials button, all right, where you can edit this drum track, go back to your dials, and look at this section now. Okay, this section is really important because this is where you kind of put the final layers on whatever sound it is you're working on. You'll see that there's another compressor here, that there is an EQ section for lows, mids, and highs, mid frequency, and low cut. What's low cut? You're cutting the low sounds out. Then you have, under sends, ambience and reverb. So let's mute these channels. There's a little speaker with a line through it. And take our looping section over here And just listen to this Duncan bridge. Okay, the lows really came up. Those are our mids. And wow, those are the high sounds. All right, now if you don't have a lot of experience with equalizing, you can always go to the EQ tab and look at this band. Your lows are going to be over here in this section around 20, 50, 100. Your mids are going to be in the middle. Your mid-range highs are going to be here, and then you've got highs here and here. Okay. So let's listen to what that sounds like when we move them around. Cutting out all the highs, bringing them back. And those lows are just a bit much. But right there they sound pretty cool. So let's bring the rest of these drums in. Go back to controls. Add a little bit of reverb, which sustains the sound of the drums, and even more ambient. So this is like the room knob that we used before. Will give us a little bit more ambient sound. And now listen to these drums matched with our yellow waveform Duncan bridge. Okay, they really stand out now. So we don't have to keep turning things up. We can actually bring this down to around this level and leave ourselves some headroom. What is headroom? Headroom is so you can turn it up later. You want to have headroom. All right, so we are getting into a little bit of mixing here, which we'll talk about later. But that's how you use the drums and the Apple loops in Garageband. For the most part, again, the only limit is your imagination. So you can stack these in whatever order that you like. You can change each one of these stems or each one of these portions of drums. You can put in different kinds of fills by moving them off of the bars. You can take whole sections out. You can double the drums. You can change the volume of the double drums. You can change the drums completely. And when you drop out sections, you can drop in either these real drums, or quote-unquote real drums, and these samples, right? Okay, so your loops are over here on the loop. If you mouse over it, it will say loop. And your tempo is here. That's how fast it's going. Your time signature is here. Your controls for the sound of the drums are here, and your controls to change the drums are here. All right, now if we go back to this track, we'll see that these controls are here. You don't have these controls on these sampled loops because you can't change them, right? So that is really the overview of how to use the drums in GarageBand. Use your imagination. Take a drum track and only use the snare. Right? Now we're hearing all the rest of it because of this one. All right, so you see what you can do with this. It's a lot. And what you want is unique or different sounding drums, because really everyone has heard these drums. So you really want to craft your drums as well as you can before you even start putting on any other kinds of tracks. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and stick around to watch the next one. We're going to get into a lot more in this, and as always, make sure and save your project to where you save projects to. Name your drum stems if you must, if you don't remember what these ones are, so that you get in the habit and the good practice of doing so. All right, I'm Adam McIntosh. I've been here for Music Over Miles. I will see you in the next tutorial.